There are actually quite a few changes from the Jordan Zion 3 to the Jordan Zion 3 SE, but are any of them any good, and are they gonna benefit you in any way? So let's get into it. Now, probably the most eye-catching and noticeable update from the Jordan 3 to the Jordan 3 SE is the dorsal retention strap on these things, which, if you've watched any of the videos on this channel ever, you'll know that I am a huge fan of dorsal retention straps. The Jordan Zion 2 had one in the distal forefoot, more for pivoting power. This one up here is much more proximal. It's usually meant for more of a lockdown, a little bit more of a feeling of stability in terms of ankle spraining, that kind of thing. Other than that, the tongue on the Jordan 3 SE and the Jordan 3 are the exact same in terms of thickness and in terms of design. However, the materials that go over that and over the rest of the shoe, well, it's textile over the tongue, but the rest of the uppers of the shoe are all synthetic leather and stitching on the SE, versus on the first colorway of the traditional that I got was just a really tight weave. Now, the interesting thing is, you look at the breathability test of the SE, you would think with all this synthetic leather that it wouldn't breathe whatsoever. However, from the Zion 3 to the Zion 3 SE, the SE only heated up 107.4 degrees. That's only a little bit over 3 degrees more than the Jordan Zion 3, which I thought was pretty interesting, because I thought, you know, if you look at the breathability mapping of the SE, it was the same as in the 3s. Really, fog is not getting out of really anywhere except for the sides of the gussets of the tongue, right? There's only a few places where air can even exchange. What I find interesting is, on a lot of shoes, they either have drop-in midsoles, right, exposed foam. That foam really holds on to heat. One thing about Formula 23 foam is that it really doesn't. It is actually pretty heat stable. So put it this way, the Zion 3 and the Zion 3 SE, both of them are gonna hold on to a lot of moisture, but they're not as heat trapping of a shoe as you would think they would be. They're actually one of the better ones out there just for how the materials themselves handle that heat, not necessarily any breathing capabilities or, or porosity of the uppers. But if you look at the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, on the SEs, that burr really does start working through that synthetic leather, versus on the original Zion 3 where, yeah, I mean, the burr works through it, but honestly, it looked like there was more damage on the SE version. Now, this is a little bit of a thicker upper. I mean, you can see the paneling here over top of the padding. That is super thick. So on an indoor court, I think you're still probably okay just because of how thick it is, but it is probably gonna start to scuff and look pretty weird even on an indoor hardwood court if you're dragging and sliding a lot. And just a word about heel slippage. I mean, in the Zion 3, it really wasn't bad at all. However, on the Zion 3 SE with a dorsal retention strap, I mean, your foot is staying put in these things. That drop-in is pretty thick in the heel. There is these two huge pads around Kager's triangle, which both sides of your Achilles tendon, and there is this just enormous foam backing here on the heel counter. So it is pretty substantial of a heel counter, but it's also flexible enough that it is going to suck down around your foot when you tie down the laces. So especially if you're putting a runner's knot back here, the heel slippage is really none. But getting into what's got to be the most bizarre part of the Zion 3 SE, even more bizarre than the original Zion, is the midsole. This is where there's quite a few changes, not just to the drop-in, but to the actual structure of the strobel board itself on the SE versus the 3s. Now, number one, they changed out the drop-in from a Formula 23 plus shank plus 4-foot zoom to just Formula 23 plus near full-length zooms. They took out the shank. Now, this actually has a lot of implications for fit, which I'll get to in just a second. However, also, they changed the strobel board from the 3 to the 3 SE, whereas the 3s were pretty traditional. It had the netting going all the way through that, right, the fabric, whereas in the 3 SEs, the fabric's in the back, right, the netted strobel, and then in the forefoot, it's just TPU, so it is a little bit more flexible versus the Zion 3s. Now, it's not much, but there is a little bit more flexibility in this one versus this. I thought that was interesting that they chose only to stitch the strobel in the rear foot versus going through the entire length of the shoe. But when talking about how substantial a change the drop-in was from the Zion 3 to the 3 SE, first of all, you look at the bounce height test. On the SE, only got 33 centimeters in the heel, 35 in the forefoot. It's an average of 34 centimeters versus the Zion 3, which was above 40. Remember, full length zoom, right, never does as well as a smaller zoom air unit, right? There's just more surface area that zoom air unit to disperse all that shock, right? It's not gonna give it back up to you. So it's a little bit more of a comfort thing once you start getting into the full length zooms, the zoom strobels, those types of things. Also, Also, there's, no shank on the Zion 3 SE either. It's gonna give that foam and air just something a little bit more rigid for that ball bearing to bounce off of. I think the biggest thing that came from the change in the 3 to the 3 SE comes in its fit. So I guess I should just do the fit section now. And it looks like, remember, the Zion 3 is an incredibly narrow shoe. And with that narrow fit, you also have this shank that comes up here, right here on the lateral foot, which makes them really unforgiving. For just any sort of foot that does not conform to this type of last. Now on the 3 SE, of course, you don't have that. And to me, it looks like Jordan Brand tried to take out the shank to make the shoe a little bit more forgiving versus having to do what we call going back to molds, which means you have to go back and change the shape of the shoe, change the mold that the shoe comes out of. Because as I know very personally now, because my buddy Noah and I have been developing a sandal for over a year, and every time we change even just a little part of this sandal from here to here, you have to go back and create a completely different mold. Now that's number one, super expensive. Number two, takes a ton of time. Yes, this sandal will be out very, very soon. We actually do have a prototype that's been on my foot a lot. You probably have seen them in the videos. That is getting changed one more time because like I said, we want it to be perfect. And so when you go back and change the mold, you gotta wait a while and you gotta have a lot of patience. Versus here on the Zion 3s, it seems like, maybe Jordan Brand did not want to have to go back and do a completely different mold. So they thought, if we take out this rigid piece here, we might be able to make the shoe a little bit more forgiving for more feet. The problem is that the Zion 3 still has this exoskeleton to it, right? It is still a pretty stiff shoe in the uppers, and it still has a pretty decent inflare to it. So the shape of the shoe is still the same. The width of the shoe is still the exact same. So the fit is still the exact same. So, a narrow foot, this is like a dream shoe for a narrow-footed player. It just sucks down on your foot so well. A medium foot, you better be going up a half size, if not a whole, because when you look at the length and width of these, number one, they're exactly the same from the 3s to the 3 SEs, but you have to look at usable space. You can't just measure, the entire insole, or you can't just measure from heel to toe. You have to look at what space is usable. And on a drop-in, typically there will be rails of the drop-in that come up almost like a Croc shoe in the back and in the front so that it sits in the shoe so it doesn't move back and forth. And sometimes even on removable insoles, they do that as well. So you got to look at what is usable. So even though it looks long and slender because it's thin, so it looks a little bit longer, this shoe is still actually pretty short because of the usable space. I noticed my foot when I was just coming down on the drop-in, my foot squishes these rails, right? It doesn't even get to the bottom of the shoe. So I don't even get the benefit of the Zoom Air on the bottom of it. It's hard for me to even feel it because I'm touching all of this stuff and I don't even have the widest foot out there. I'm just a little bit wide. So, if you are a narrow foot though, in terms of the Zion 3 SE, you're not getting the shank on this, and the shoe is a little bit more flexible because of just the TPU and the forefoot. Yeah, like I said, it does have an exoskeleton that does hold it on the lateral and medial side. It's gonna hold that drop-in in. But it's just not as good as the original Zion in terms of any of those snake bites on the bottom of your foot. The Formula 23 is very dense on this. It actually does feel pretty substantial on foot. It's just, to me, I worry about stress and strain once that Formula 23 starts breaking down, once this exoskeleton starts breaking down, because it still is pretty flexible. This is not stiff TPU, so this shoe is gonna start to bend over time. You are gonna start to get a lot more stress and strain on your foot from that. So, I think if you are someone with lumps, bumps, bruises, snake bites, any type of torsional injuries, anything that needs a little bit more stability, then if you want the SE, you better be getting Jordan Zion 3 drop-ins to put in there because they will fit. And, with this, yeah, it's comfortable with the Zoom Air if you're a narrow foot, but anything else, I can't really see where you're gonna go with this. So, yeah, they're gonna be a little bit more forgiving without this plastic piece, but still, it's still gonna be super unforgiving. And honestly, this is where the barefoot and the anatomic shoe community, this is where they get all their fodder, because when a shoe's this narrow, plus it's a drop-in, people are really gonna notice it. But after that entire diatribe, I guess I should tell you that the outsole tread on this is exactly the same, but from the colorways I have from the 3 to 3 SE, it's just reversed. The translucent rubber is now in the forefoot, and the dyed rubber is on the rest of it. It is just basically a radial pattern around the shoe and then herringbone in the forefoot. Thing I noticed is the rubber on the 3 SE is a little bit tackier. On the grip test ramp, these did not slip initially until 45 degrees. The problem is that because of that tacky rubber, it picks up dust like you wouldn't believe. It's got all these little grooves in there just to pick dust up. I was constantly having to rub these down. If I just rub them down with my hand though, you know, it's just like, you know, every few minutes rub them down. Yeah, the grip stayed very, very good, very, very tacky on them. But if you start forgetting to rub them down, or you're in a long series and you just don't have a chance, you start forgetting, they do start to slip out from underneath of you. The other problem with these is if you look at the speed ratio, remember from the midsole teardown, the 3 SE is quite a bit heavier than the 3s. So the speed ratio is coming down a lot, especially because you don't have the shank either. You don't get a shank score, it's 0.0. So they only come in at a 1.98 in terms of speed. And honestly, I think that's really where they belong. Yes, they are slender and they are pretty streamlined getting up and down the court, but there's just nothing bracing this shoe after a while. So yeah, initially you're gonna get some decent speed, you're gonna get some decent push off of them, but once they start breaking down, because there's just really nothing holding that shoe together aside from these wings here on the medial and lateral side. And so yeah, initially it's going to be great, but after a while, they're going to start to feel a little bit deadened as the Formula 23 starts to deaden. Because remember, this Zoom has nothing to bounce off of. It has nothing to cantilever off of, right? So as this whole thing starts to bend, the Zoom Air is just going to start to bend too. So it's going to kind of be like a soldier without a country after a while. So, you know, I hate to keep piling on. Look at the outsole durability test on these. 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper 2. I mean, yeah, you get a millimeter of damage. The problem is when you get that millimeter of damage, you're bottoming out the tread into that bottom tread pattern. So it really starts to meld together. The interesting thing is the durometer of this comes in at a 16. So it actually is a little bit harder than some other rubbers we've seen recently. It's just that the shape and the depth of it just really don't allow these to be really placed on, I think, anything but indoor hardwood or rubberized. I honestly think rubberized courts are the best thing for these, just because you're going to get a little bit more bounce, a little bit more resiliency, right? So even though the shoe maybe later on is maybe feel a little bit deadened, you're still going to get some bounce out of the court. It's a bouncy hardwood court, like that one Zion was playing on, that really bouncy hardwood court when he was coming back from his injury. That's, I think, kind of like the best thing, ironically, for these shoes, especially in terms of launch, bounce, and speed. But getting into the performance of the Zion 3s, honestly, I don't think I'm the best person to judge this, because I'm just in pain when I'm in these, because, I don't have a slender, narrow foot. The one thing I will say is, though, the lockdown with the dorsal retention strap is just phenomenal. I mean, especially if you're the right foot type for these. So I hate to say that these are, quote unquote, bad shoes for me, because I'm just not the right person to evaluate them, because like I said, I'm just, I can't really play my best of them, whatever my best happens to be. But I will say the lockdown on them is out of this world. The lateral flange on them, having the lateral flange on the forefoot as well as here on the midfoot, like in the Zion 3s, is a crazy asset. I absolutely love this design. I mean, I think this should be on every shoe, this, more midfoot flange. Like I said, I think in terms of pivoting power, in terms of feeling really nimble, I think just the regular Zion 3 is the better option at this point, just because it's lighter. You get the same stability. You actually get way more stability out of the Zion 3, because you get the same shape. You get the midfoot flange on this too, plus you do get the shank on the drop-in, so this drop-in is going to last a lot more. And if you're playing up on the balls of your foot, and pushing off the balls of your foot, jumping, this is going to give you a little bit more of a sensation of bounce, because number one, it's more contained. Number two, it's got the the shank on there. So really everything about the SE, the original, I think does quite a bit better, to be honest. The SE, yeah, for lockdown, I think is much better, just because, yeah, it's got the dorsal retention strap, but I didn't think the Zion 3 had a really bad lockdown either. So, I'd love to know your thoughts, to be honest, why Jordan Brand came out with the updates on the SE that they did. Were they just looking to get, a drop-in with, near full-length zoom into it? It is nice that you have options, right? Like you can do either the 3/4 length zoom, or you can do the shank. If you want the synthetic leather, if you want the dorsal retention strap, you can then put your, Formula 23 plus shank plus zoom drop-in in this as well. And like I said, if you're a narrow-footed player, you're going to have a completely different experience in these than I did. So, don't take away that this is, bad in any way. Like I said, I thought the Zion 3, I keep saying Jordan 3 in my head, but I kept saying the Zion 3 was just a tremendous shoe for a narrow-footed player in my review of them, and I still think that holds true. It's just, I think the SE got changed in ways that in terms of performance, I just don't think it performs at the level of the original. Yeah, it looks a little bit better. The dorsal retention strap is phenomenal, and I just think that every shoe should have these. But in terms of how it actually feels on court, it leaves a little bit to be desired, and that's why you really can't judge a shoe just by what you see of it, you know, on the website, because you know, it really depends on how all those little pieces of tech actually work together and what they actually do once they're, you know, once all the parts create, you know, a sum to the whole. So love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. I know that I got on a lot of soapboxes about this shoe. I know there's a lot of rambling, so thank you for sticking with me if you are at the end of this video. And like I said, let me know your thoughts about these, especially, you know, from the 3 SEs down below. And if you do want to see the older sibling to the Jordan Zion 3 SE, the OG, and like I always say, the original is usually always the best, the Jordan Zion 3 going to the knife, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.